Flight MH370 did something no accident can explain. It slipped past air traffic control, passed 3 militaries without triggering a response, and outlasted the largest search in aviation history. Somebody made sure it would never be found. Just after midnight on March 8, 2014, MH370 prepared for takeoff from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The flight was bound for Beijing, a route the airline flew every day. The next 39 minutes were routine. On board were 227 passengers and 12 crew, including a delegation of Chinese calligraphers, 20 employees of an American semiconductor firm, and an IBM executive from Texas. 2 men were traveling on stolen European passports. They would soon become the world's prime suspects. In the cockpit sat 52-year-old Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah, who had more than 18,000 hours of experience in the air. He was one of Malaysia Airlines' most senior pilots. Beside him sat 26-year-old First Officer Fariq Hamid on what was supposed to be his final training flight. At 12:42 a.m., MH370 lifted off into a clear night sky and climbed northeast out over the South China Sea. At 1:19 a.m., MH370 approached the edge of Malaysian airspace. Kuala Lumpur Control gave the flight its routine handoff to Vietnam. Captain Zahari answered calmly, "Good night, Malaysian 370. This was the last time anyone would ever hear from the flight. Less than 2 minutes later, MH370 vanished from air traffic control screens. Every airliner is tracked 2 ways. Primary radar bounces a signal off the aircraft and paints a bare blip. Secondary radar provides more information. It reads a transponder aboard the plane that broadcasts its identity, altitude, and speed. When MH370 disappeared from those screens, that was because the transponder went silent. Either it failed, or someone in the cockpit shut it off. And there's a way to likely tell the difference. The mode selector switch on a 777 transponder isn't a single on-off toggle. It's a dial with a row of settings controlling the amount of information transmitted. To move it from fully operational to standby, it has to be physically rotated through every position in between. The last full data point came at 1:20 a.m. and 33 seconds. Half a second later, came another data point, but the altitude information was missing. A fraction of a second after that, the signal died. This data is consistent with a dial being rotated by hand through an intermediate position on its way to standby. A catastrophic failure like a lithium battery fire or a mechanical failure would likely sever the transmission cleanly. It's very likely someone deliberately turned it off, and the moment they chose is a second clue. The transponder went dark almost exactly at waypoint Agari. This is located along the border where Malaysian air traffic control hands a plane to Vietnamese control. It's the single point on the entire route where an aircraft can drop off one country's screen without causing immediate alarm, because each side assumes the plane is the other country's responsibility. This is exactly what happened. And 17 minutes after disappearing, Ho Chi Minh Control called Kuala Lumpur. The flight had never checked in. Confusion set in and phone calls bounced between control centers. Hours would pass before anyone officially declared the plane missing. It was here that the person flying MH370 executed the second phase of their disappearance. They turned around. The plane turned back toward Malaysia, and it was here that the flight left one of its only fingerprints. As it passed the island of Penang, the first officer's phone briefly registered on a cell tower below. No call was made, and nobody else on the flight made cell contact. But this indicated that the airplane was still in the air and on a designated path. The strongest explanation for the lack of phone contact is chilling. The pilot depressurized the cabin deliberately, and at that altitude, everyone else would have lost consciousness within minutes, while he stayed alive on the cockpit's separate oxygen supply. In addition to radar, MH370 had a second link to the ground, a satellite data link called satcom. The scheduled satcom communication at 1:37 a.m. never arrived. It had gone dark, just like the transponder. But the disappearing act still had one obstacle: military radar. Unlike civilian controllers, military systems watch on primary radar, which don't need a transponder to see the airplane. 3 countries had the capability to catch MH370, but none reacted. Malaysia and Thailand's militaries both deemed MH370 a non-threat. Indonesia's radar, for reasons its own officials have never fully explained, registered nothing. At 2:22 a.m., the plane passed the last edge of military coverage over the Andaman Sea. The disappearing act was complete. Nothing on Earth was tracking it. The vanishing was nearly perfect until 3 minutes later, which can be best described as a mistake. The satcom logged back on. A mid-flight log-on means the satellite data unit lost power and then regained it. For this to happen, someone would have likely had to restore power manually. Engineers at Inmarsat, the satcom company, found that for the next 7 hours, the plane answered an automatic hourly check-in called a handshake. The delay before each signal reached the satellite revealed the plane's distance, drawing a ring across the Earth, while frequency shifts revealed its direction. Together, those rings revealed the final 7th arc, which illustrates that after MH370 flew over the Andaman Sea, it turned south and flew until a final log-on at 8:19 a.m. marked fuel exhaustion. The plane went south, and it had crashed into the sea. In July 2015, debris began washing ashore across the western Indian Ocean. The general flight path is essentially solved. The airplane likely crashed somewhere on or near the 7th arc. But that's not the biggest mystery. Who was flying, and why fly specifically into the middle of the Indian Ocean? If this were a straightforward case of a pilot taking their own life, the choice makes little sense. Someone intent on ending things likely does it fast, like the case of Germanwings 9525 in 2015, where the co-pilot simply pointed the aircraft at a mountain. What MH370's operator did is the opposite. A slow, controlled, meticulously hidden 7-hour flight to a place chosen specifically so the evidence would sink beyond reach. More than just self-destruction, this required a determination that nobody would ever understand it. So who was capable of that? The 2 men on stolen passports, the world's first suspects, were identified as Iranians, aged 19 and 29. But Interpol assessed them as probable asylum seekers, not terrorists. No terrorist organization ever claimed the aircraft. A hijacker would likely make demands and seek a runway. First Officer Farik Hamid was 27, newly engaged and on his last training flight, with a career just beginning. Investigators looking for a reason, including debt, extremism, grievance, and instability, found none. He also had only 39 hours on the 777. Whoever flew this route had knowledge that only lives in the head of an engineer or a very senior pilot, which leaves the captain and the strangest piece of evidence in the entire case. Captain Zahari had flown for Malaysia Airlines since 1981 and was a senior training captain trusted to certify other pilots. He was, by most accounts, generous and well-liked. A man who posted home repair videos online and loved aviation enough that after flying a 777 for a living, he came home and flew a flight simulator he'd built himself in a spare room. That simulator became the center of the case. With FBI help, investigators recovered deleted data from its hard drives. Among thousands of save points, they found a set dated to February 2nd, 2014, 5 weeks before the disappearance. These data points illustrate a route strikingly similar to MH370's. Up the Strait of Malacca, a turn south, ending with the fuel exhausted deep in the southern Indian Ocean. But this finding is not definitive proof. The data is not a recording of one continuous flight. It's a handful of saved snapshots, most likely from a single session in which Zahari paused, dragged the plane forward on the map, and changed the fuel by hand between saves, the way anyone messing around in a simulator skips ahead. There are ordinary explanations. The fuel load matched a real route he was about to fly. And gliding a 777 with dead engines is a skill worth rehearsing. Malaysian officials, reviewing all of it, publicly concluded there was nothing sinister. The simulator does not prove Zahari flew MH370 to its demise. What it shows is that of all the thousands of places his simulated flights could have ended, at least one ended by running out of fuel in the southern Indian Ocean. Investigators concluded Zahari had no clear motive, no note or manifesto, and no debts. But reports from people close to the family described a marriage under strain, with his wife said to be living apart from him in the period before the flight. Some acquaintances described a man who had grown distant and preoccupied. Others insisted he was steady to the end. None of it is confirmed. There's also the matter of timing. Zahari was an outspoken supporter of Malaysia's political opposition, and before MH370 departed, a court sentenced opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim to 5 years in prison. Some reports placed Zahari at the courthouse that day, but as a motive, it's thin. The question remains, why go to such extraordinary lengths to disappear rather than simply crash? A disappearance protects something a crash does not: his memory. A vanishing leaves a mystery that prevents blame. That would fit a man who never outwardly showed any intent to end his life, and meant to keep it that way. If true, the plan is still working. One question divides investigators to this day: whether anyone was alive when the airplane flew into the ocean. The final satellite data suggests a rapid descent after fuel exhaustion, but if a pilot was still at the controls, the aircraft could have glided far beyond the 7th arc, past the edge of every search area drawn since. That would explain why the hole has never been found. But even finding the wreckage may not explain why somebody crashed it. The cockpit voice recorder only holds the final 2 hours of the flight. Unless the pilot was talking to himself, the most likely recording is silence. It may still be down there, but the hours that mattered are gone.